All right, man, I'm excited to get to welcome everybody to Center Technology's first ever Barrel Select program. I'm James Schuler, and with me as always, Taylor Littlejohn, our producer. Taylor, you there with me?
I'm here. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, where are we right now?
We are live from Ranger Creek in San Antonio. It's kind of an interesting spot, actually. Y'all should check it out.
What's Ranger Creek do?
They sell whiskey.
And beer and a whole lot of other stuff. Brewstillery. Boy, we're going to get deep into that today. A lot on the Brewstillery topic. Taylor, what's your favorite whiskey?
I think it's Ranger Creek. I'm not even a whiskey fan, but
Fireball, quit lying.
After this, don't tell my secret. Yeah, no, it's actually not a big whiskey fan, but Ranger Creek's...
Ouch.
It's all right. It's converting me a little bit
to
a whiskey fan, yeah.
A lot of different flavors at Ranger Creek. Boy, start over. Everybody out of the waiting room. Start everything from scratch. Hey, Ranger Creek has a lot of different flavors of whiskey, and so we're going to get deep into what they have to offer. If you haven't had them yet, you're going to get to try it because we've gone out and done our own Barrel Select. And so this barrel right here is the barrel that all this got bottled from. So 2 weeks ago, this didn't exist in a bottle. It was sitting in this barrel, and within a week from now, will be in your hands because you attended today. So thank y'all all for being a part of this with us. The journey so far has been pretty fun. We've done a lot with meat. We've taken y'all through a number of different areas on everything from grass-fed beef to Wagyu meat. We did barbecue restaurants in San Antonio, and now we're sitting at a whiskey distillery in San Antonio. And if you joined us most frequently, you got to enjoy Jess Pryles and the Hardcore Carnivore offering. Well, now we're sticking in the same hill country area and talking about whiskey. So if you're in the wrong place and you expected something that wasn't as fun as whiskey, feel free to drop off now. No big deal. We'll still come talk to you. But everyone else who's here for cybersecurity, don't sweat it. Brett Rogers from Arctic Wolf's here with us today. Brett is part of the leadership team for their concierge offering, and that concierge program is one of, if not many reasons, I think Arctic Wolf is the most unique offering out there when it comes to really anything under the security umbrella for MDR, SIM, managed risk, and vulnerability scanning. Really almost everything that you would look at for an elevated IT posture, they do it. So thank you for being with us, Brett.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy. My hometown is San Antonio, so it's always a great time to come down here to Ranger Creek.
You got a pretty cool story on why you're in San Antonio. Share a little bit about why you moved here.
Sure. So getting to San Antonio for me, it was actually because of the military. So I grew up as a military brat. My father was Air Force and moved all around, all over the place, and I followed in his footsteps. And I was a computer electrical engineer, got brought into the Air Force, and then sent to Cybercom, came down here to Texas and loved it so much I never wanted to leave. So when it came time for me to head somewhere else, I decided to stick out here in San Antonio.
Yeah, I think we hear a lot about all the different military veterans that serve time in different areas outside of cyber. It's awesome that you were in that spot. Now, tomorrow's Veterans Day, I believe, if I got my calendar right in my head. Today's Whiskey Day and cybersecurity and everything else, but tomorrow's Veterans Day. Thank you for your service. Appreciate you doing that for our country.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Now, less important, but still very fun. You're a fan of this place too, right? You come to Ranger Creek from time to time?
I do. It's fantastic. I'm a big rye fan, so rye whiskey is my go-to.
Rye whiskey.
This right here in the backyard.
Right? So we haven't asked the group to do this yet. Ranger Creek is one of your favorites. I know it already is, but if I went to your home right now, what's your go-to whiskey you have at the house?
My go-to whiskey that I have at the house. I got a couple. I have a Bullet Rye is probably one of my favorites, and then as well as when I was in the military, I spent some time in Japan, and I developed a taste for Hibiki.
Ooh.
Hibiki Harmony. So.
Very exotic. Mine's less exotic. In Utah, they got the High West program going on up there. I'm a big fan of High West. Not quite as pretty of a distillery as Ranger Creek, but still very nice. Taylor, is anyone, I guess, could you ask them to chime in? I'd love to know everybody's go-to whiskey, what they prefer to drink. Another question, love to know if they've ever had Ranger Creek before, if you don't mind starting that chat.
Yeah.
That'd be great. All right, so you're part of a specific program within Arctic Wolf. There's a bunch of different sectors within Arctic Wolf. One around employee security awareness training, another around SOC and MDR or SIM, looking for, I guess, any threats that might pop up. And then there's this concierge program. Tell me a little about what y'all do and what makes it sync with the rest of the other departments.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So I think early on at Arctic Wolf, we realized that we're not looking for a point solution, right? There's a lot of things within cybersecurity that you need to address. It's not just, MDR, it's not just endpoint, it's not just network. And as part of that, the concept of concierge security came about. And so we really wanted to do was be able to not just offer the core pieces of our service, but extend beyond that. And primarily around the ways we do that in concierge is through affecting customer posture. And so, you get the MDR service, for example, lots of vendors out there are going to have SOC 24/7, 365. They're going to have alerting that's going out. They're going to have escalation paths. They're going to have data or some kind of telemetry that's coming in at different levels. On the concierge side, what we want to do is take that and then also make sure that we're getting deep in with the customer, being an extension of their security team, and understand the contextual information that comes out of that. Right?
What is contextual information?
Right. So customers are different, right? Every business is different. Every business has different things that they focus on, different ways that their networks are set up, different things that are important to them, different ways that they go about conducting IT operations in order to ultimately support business operations. And so a one-size-fits-all SOC doesn't really work. SOCs are very good at scaling in breadth, but with concierge, what we want to do is scale in depth. And so that kind of comes in two flavors. One is we want to get to know our customers. We want to understand what are their drivers, what are the things that they're looking at. If they have business drivers or requirements coming down from their leadership on certain areas they want to get shored up on, we want to make sure that they're getting the most out of the service, and then we want to also help them in those journeys. So a good example is, for example, we don't, at Arctic Wolf, we don't manage firewalls. That's not something that we traditionally do. However, from a security perspective, we have a point of view on what a well-configured firewall looks like, what those rule sets are. And so what we want to do is get that information from our customers, review that information, and make sure that we have a critical third eye that's constantly driving their posture forward.
Do all Arctic Wolf customers get a concierge?
Yes.
So if you are doing MDR, you get a concierge.
Correct.
But if you're doing another line of business, do you get a concierge too?
Yes. So and that's the great thing about concierge is, if you think about it, the more services you have, that's more data that's coming into our platform.
Sure.
So that's more data to feed the concierge and making recommendations and doing assessments in publishing best practices and making sure that we're moving your security operations forward. So from an MDR perspective, we're going to get primarily telemetry around MDR, network, endpoint, cloud, data.
Yeah.
You add managed risk on top of that. Now we have risk data to be able to look at both of those things, and ultimately kind of the tack that I like to say is, in cybersecurity, there's an infinite amount of work to be done. So the question isn't what to do, it's when to do it.
Nice.
And so having that information, being able to prioritize that with the customer becomes extremely powerful to make sure that we're all moving forward.
And would you argue that your competitors out there, because a lot of SOCs exist today, would you say that level of concierge, that granularity, is that unique to Arctic Wolf, or are most trying to emulate that today?
I would say that it's definitely unique to Arctic Wolf in the way that we're delivering it. I think a lot of times that places that tend to scratch that itch are traditionally in the consulting framework. So you get to your Big Four consulting, and coming from a previous Big Four consultant, I mean, it's great, but the challenge is that's a very expensive offering to have a consultant come in and do this work. Whereas we realize that there's a lot of benefit in doing that as part of a security package.
Right.
And so we built concierge in as a core offering across Arctic Wolf. So when you do get MDR, you're getting all of the industry best practice pieces of MDR, but then you also have a concierge team who's continuing to drive that forward and extend that value and make sure that we're understanding, are you getting value out of this?
Sure.
And if you are, great, how do we continue to move that in the right direction? And if you're not, what do we need to do in order to make sure that that's happening?
If I hear it right, it's an enterprise grade product, as robust as any enterprise would need, but it comes with a personalized service and a local touch.
Yeah, and it's the other thing about, here in San Antonio, for example, right, we have a SOC. We have SOCs all across North America. The goal is for your concierge team to provide exactly that local piece, that security expertise in a localized way where we can scale deep with the customer, understand what their drivers are, and make sure that they're getting value out of the service.
Yeah, Center preaches a very similar story, that we carry enough enterprise-grade products, but bring enough local touch and personalized service, that it's easy for us to be able to be there and be robust enough for any size organization. The marriage between our two companies seems rather natural in that regard. There's a number of layers, though, that come with a layered cybersecurity approach. Things as elementary as antivirus, and the stack goes all the way up to segmentation testing, penetration testing, and other concepts. you guys carry a pretty large breadth of service offerings that extend Center's reach so that we can offer that enterprise grade product while not sacrificing local touch. That's the value you bring to us. What about vice versa? Where does that MSP space, like Center, how does that extend your reach into being able to service those customers?
Absolutely, and I think this kind of gets into, we've talked about this previously, the idea of, what's the most important thing in order to get started in cybersecurity? And my opinion has always been it's the ability to do IT operations. So
say that again. So if you were starting from scratch, if you hadn't spent $1 yet in IT and you were a business owner of either a new business or maybe a new owner to an existing business, you would start your analyzing at what stage?
IT operations.
Explain what IT ops means in your mind.
Sure. So it's the ability to dynamically roll out, modify, change, update your environment. An analogy I use a lot of times is, a lot of times we look at cyber risk and we think that it's unique. In reality, risk is something that's been around for a very long time, and there's a lot of analogy and things we can learn from the financial world, right? It's the same thing. Finance, you carry a portfolio of risk. In IT, you're carrying a portfolio of risk. It's just spread over different styles of IT infrastructure as opposed to different styles of portfolio or vehicles. The most important thing is being able to, one, understand what you have. So that being IT inventory, that being understanding the components, what actually makes up your network, and two, being able to change those things. So if I need to patch something, if I need to shutter a service, if I need to load balance, those things become very important in the same way that from a financial portfolio, if I had, if I didn't know what money I had and I didn't know where that money was, I can't start then working on how am I going to do operations on top of it.
Yeah, that's strong. There's a massive spectrum, and the pendulum can swing one way or the other way, and you got to find that happy medium. For some businesses, depending on their industry, their size, and their maturity, maybe antivirus with EDR, maybe a SOC on top of that EDR might be more than enough. For others, maybe they need something far more robust. And so deciding what your appetite is for risk and then following through with a strategy is really what gets you there. Our last event we did, I wish you could have been a part of. You would have loved it. But we were in the hill country at Canyon Lake, and we had Jess Pryles, a hardcore carnivore, on, and we had Willis Towers Watson, one of the largest insurance brokers. They were talking about how the minimum requirements for cyber insurance today, which follows NIST guidelines, I may add. Those minimum requirements are the third-party audit for most small business today. Yep. So it's not necessarily always what is your appetite for spending money in IT, it's at what point do you draw the line on what do I need for my business to survive and allocating costs to that. What do y'all see in that regard for the cyber insurance world where people are making claims or worried, am I covered? Does business come that direction? Do y'all help organizations in that state?
I mean, it does. I think a lot of it is right now in insurance, the market itself is relatively new. They're still trying to figure out kind of the things that they need in order to, what are the things that are going to change my deductible and move from one side to another, right? Yep. What are the basic building blocks of that foundation? And so a lot of times when we're working with customers, it's addressing those pieces. And so there are certain parts within insurance that it's really easy to see, right? Do you have a SOC? Do you have a 24/7 security monitoring capability? Do you have scanning of systems in order to determine vulnerabilities? Do you have the ability, this gets into IT operations and also where I think we partner very well, do you have the ability to go make change? If you recognize that there is a vulnerability, do you have the ability to then go address that? Or is it just that there's a problem there and now you're scrambling trying to figure out how to fix it?
Right.
And this is where I think, getting back into concierge, like there's another layer that we're able to do, apply onto that, because when you start getting into, do you have best practices implemented at this level? Do you have, whether it's O365 or whatever your SaaS pieces are, configured in a way that ensures that there's data trust and that you have monitoring of those capabilities? And those things continue to evolve. And so like while there are the core pieces that you can kind of say, hey, from an insurance perspective, like here's what I'm looking at when I go vendor shopping. Does it have a SOC? Does it have whatever? Right. From a concierge piece, one, that list is continuing to grow, and we constantly are looking at those lists to make sure that we do units of work. We call them spiders. It's a terrible acronym. I won't go into it. But basically consider it a unit of work where we're looking at how do I move the ball forward in this area. So if it's, how leveraging proper permissioning on PowerShell, something super tactical, right? We're constantly looking at what are the best practices here? How do I work with my customers to make sure those are implemented? How do we see as we get data coming in, is the data consistent with those being implemented in a correct way?
Yep.
Has the customer said, yes, we're on it, or yes, we're on this track, or no, I'm not worried about it? And
Yep.
if they're not, like, let's keep a look on that to make sure that those things are acting the way that they should. Insurance is going to continue to evolve, and the way that cyber insurance underwrites is going to continue to evolve.
Sure.
And so having a static service that's just saying, hey, this is the SOC, this is what you get, this is what we do, that's great as long as what you're looking at doesn't need to change, but it will.
Half of the audience today, I know them well. The other half I may not have met yet, but I do know that half of that half that I do know well may have found what you said to be a bit foreign.
Okay.
To some degree, they might not even be yet ready to know about really half the words you said. So regardless of that, it's good to know you got someone that technical behind you. How much adoption have you seen from the small business space? Have they started to trust Arctic Wolf and the security experts you have, or is it primarily an enterprise grade play?
No, absolutely, and I would even say, like, in the SMB and even the low commercial spot is where we've seen a huge effect happening with our customers, value being driven, and a lot of that comes from the fact of, with the concierge team, right? If you are a company that has a couple of IT folks, and so you're primarily worried about IT operations, and you don't even really have a budget for security,
right?
Having a vendor that is there, that is an extension of your team as the security expert that's representing those things, and a lot of times it's actually easier to do some of those operations at that small level because you don't have a massive infrastructure architecture team,
right?
And so that partnership of being able to work with them directly and say, hey, from a security perspective, these are the things you need to be worried about.
Right.
Here's what we think that you should do. Oh, and by the way, at any point in time, if you have a question, if there's something that pops up, if there's something you're interested in, not even if it's alert related, if it's just, hey, I'm worried about X, Y, or Z in my environment, you can send that to us, and the concierge team will focus on that and work with you. And it's part of that proactive service and being part of that team that really helps move that forward.
Yeah, if I was a small business wanting to pretend I was an enterprise grade business, I would want to put money towards what a CIO does, what a CTO does, and what a CISO does today. And essentially, you could invest in an MSP, the right MSP, with the appropriate layers of security in place, and Arctic Wolf alongside them, and you would have all those areas covered. Now, to your point, your area of maturity on that spectrum of risk appetite, it may not call for that. But that would be a way to simplify the easy button, if you might want to say, to getting to that point. So that's a really good way to look at it, in my opinion.
I completely agree. Like the driving principle, again, to go back to that saying that I had, there's an infinite amount of work to do, so it's not what you do when you do it.
Sure.
The majority of what, when we're interacting with customers, when we're meeting with customers on a regular basis, we have proactive touchpoint calls. It's understanding, hey, what are the things that you are worried about? Here are the things that we layer on top of that.
Yeah.
Let's come up with a plan together, and we're going to focus on these things and knock them out.
So let's go into a real life example. You gave me a great story earlier. The story was all about one of the very first attacks we got to hear about. Man, was it like two and a half almost years ago? It was a while back, but it feels like yesterday. For those of y'all listening right now, there was all this talk about the Colonial Pipeline attack. There was all this talk about the JBS Foods attack. Y'all probably remember the Exchange on-prem issues that were going on. But keep going back further, and you remember the SolarWinds breach. In that case, SolarWinds told all their customers this update is a need. And the customers that followed through and did that opened the door to bad actors to jump right in. Back then, I remember asking tons of questions to everyone I knew in the security space. I'll save names, but I remember asking questions. How would you have noticed this? Security companies that make firewalls, security companies that say they got all the different tools, and each one of them said they weren't sure until it became a bad deal, would they know for sure they would see it. I heard some interesting stories though, Brett, about how you guys would start to pick that up as a concierge, as an integration with their customer. How would that really play out? Will you take them through that?
Sure.
Thanks.
So yeah, it does seem like it was so long ago. A lot of times, or I shouldn't say a lot of times, when this particular attack happened, what was really unique about it is it was kind of the first major digital supply chain attack that we saw affecting a wide area of
in
the
a few
industry.
decades. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's unique, especially about SolarWinds, is the fact that individuals are trusting that tool to carry out work for them. So it's part of that automation, part of that doing work. And so a lot of times, you're letting it drive and you're saying, okay, we're good to go.
Yeah.
What we saw at first was, of course, we started seeing it act a little bit differently. There were some alarm bells that started getting tripped, And when we see things that were happening, we reach out to the customers and for a particular customer and say, hey, we think that this is some odd activity that we're seeing. Part of the beauty of the concierge is while we have a SOC that's looking at alert data, this is this and this and this equals alert. The concierge is looking at the data that feeds that, is looking for things that are out of the ordinary. And because they get to know their portfolio of customers, they can understand and see like how often has this thing happened in the past, and effectively we're going through that data and looking at it, comparing it as a baseline. And so with SolarWinds specifically, we started seeing things that were out of character, and so we reach out to the customer and say, hey, this looks like it's different, it's unique. Are you aware of this? And we get the oh no, it's SolarWinds, it's doing things it's supposed to be doing it.
We know it's there. It's supposed to be there.
It's
I paid for it to be
SolarWinds is doing the things
Right.
that SolarWinds is supposed to be doing. And I think this is, and we can double click on this a little bit later, but this is also, if you're using a SaaS and you're using a third-party piece, you want to understand what it is that you expect it to do. So when it's not doing that, you know that something's up. But in this case, hey, we're good. And so, but from the concierge perspective, like, we want to keep looking at that. Like, we don't necessarily take that at face value.
Sure.
We want to be a critical third-party advisor. We want to be that trusted advisor, and so we continue to look at it, and then we reach out to them again and say, "Hey, no, this is really strange. I don't think this is what it's supposed to be doing."
Look again.
We look again. That dialogue starts, and then the news media reports start coming out that something's going on with SolarWinds. And so, getting ahead of that and having that conversation, being able to point down to when these things are happening. At that point in time, the customer knew immediately, like, okay, this is big. Like, we need to go shutter this, figure out what was happening. We have the data that are from our MDR service that we're pouring through, looking at what in the logs is transacting, what are the things that are going on, how do I help pinpoint when this started acting differently, what it was doing when it was doing it, and ultimately coming together in order to scope that piece out. But a lot of that are things that, especially when it comes to digital supply chain, traditionally it's I trust that this thing will
Right.
do what it does. And so having somebody who's going to look at that and say, hey, this is acting in a way that we wouldn't normally expect it to, really helps kind of move you in that proactive space to being
Right.
able to be more agile at reacting to something like that.
Conversely, maybe the competition would stop short. They might say, we notified the client said, hey, this is normal behavior. SolarWinds is part of our environment. I know because I pay a renewal every year of some stupid high amount, and we know it's here. And then in turn, they would say, great, document it, and then claim the client knows we're good to go, even though maybe even you realize that there's a risk there.
Well, that's
the concierge service, though, goes the step further.
Right, and that's part of the driving, I would say, force of the concierge service is we look at things like our engineers, our concierge security engineers, their job is to own security outcomes.
Sure.
And so that is in partnership with their customers, but they also realize like they are a fan of their customers. They're cheering them on. They don't want, like, we don't want to just say, yep, this is good. Oh, customer said it's okay. It's not my problem anymore. Like, it is, because we're in this together. It's a partnership, and we don't want those things to happen. And so there are times when we'll work with customers and, hey, why do you keep bringing that up? Why do you keep bringing that risk
Right.
up? And it's, well, because it's important. Sometimes we got to be that, the naggy angel on the shoulder saying like, hey, are you really, like, please focus on this risk, because it's important and it helps to move the customer forward. We want that posture to continue to increase, and we want it for a couple of reasons. One is because it's what's best for the customer and the posture. Two, selfishly, the more risk that we can mitigate upstream before it becomes realized and is an alert that's sent to the SOC, the less work that the SOC is going to have to do. So
Gotcha.
we inherently have a selfish reason to want to stop attacks as far left of boom as possible.
So Arctic Wolf, the Naggy Angel. That's the new tagline.
I'll have to let our marketing
I
department know.
like
and
that.
see
Yeah,
if
the
they,
Naggy Angel. Hey, so that was a tease you made a moment ago. I think a lot of our clients are in the space right now where they're starting to look at decreasing their data center space, maybe find a way to get out of servers altogether and leverage SaaS offerings completely. We just talked about how maybe that's a good way to go about things, but still a risk nonetheless.
Yes, and so I think SaaS is really interesting because there is, when you look at risk, there's an idea of risk transference, there's risk mitigation. In the SaaS place, like, more often than not, we see adversaries that are targeting what we would traditionally call like the vulnerability to patch gap.
Yeah.
And so I think a good example of this is you look at Hafnium, which was an event that happened with Microsoft Exchange on-prem servers. Microsoft patches O365. They patch all of their things ahead of time. And then for the on-prem Exchange servers, they now have to let people know, hey, it's time to patch these things. Well, the challenge is when you let everybody know, you also let the adversaries know. And
You
the
let everybody
adversaries,
know.
yeah, right. And so they're going to do the adversary thing, is
Right.
take that patch, reverse engineer it, figure out what it's fixing, and then target
Right.
customers that haven't patched yet. And based off of how complicated that patching process is, if it's 5 KBs that have to be in a specific order, you're also betting that out of the thousands and thousands of people who have this tool, maybe there's somebody who applied them in the wrong order.
Right.
By going to a SaaS solution, so in this case like O365, you are patched before that happens. So there is a risk mitigation that happens there. However, there is also a risk transference that happens there.
Okay.
And that is around the data, right? So if I am using O365, my data is no longer on my servers. It's not on my on-prem Exchange servers. It is
Sure.
on somebody else's servers. You may think, hey, that's I've transferred that risk. That's not my problem anymore. But that's very similar to being in finance and saying, hey, I've got my money. I've handed it off to a financial advisor. They're going to manage it for me. That's not my risk anymore. It still is. It's still your money. Like that money goes away. Like you are still the one that's on the hook for
It can go away.
I don't know if you've been paying attention, but yes, it can. In the so like same thing. Like when you're using a third-party a SaaS offering, like that happens. That risk is transferred, and that's something that you are still going to have to be aware of. And so the realization that while you can mitigate some risk by doing that transfer, or by going with a SaaS application, you also have to be aware of the risk that you are transferring. And the two areas that comes in is data and that access,
Sure.
as well as the trusted relationship that's there. So this kind of goes back to the SolarWinds example. So if I am trusting SolarWinds, I'm using them as a third party to do things. I am now transferring that trusted relationship. I am allowing them to make changes on my network. If an adversary were to take advantage of that, they get to act as SolarWinds. In that case, has happened.
Right.
So that risk wasn't mitigated; it was just transferred.
Right.
So a lot of times it's about understanding that risk, and that's going to be different for different business units, and
Yeah.
understanding the relative risk that's there as well.
You said insurance will continue to evolve, and they did in that moment. They decided to say, we analyzed your risk. We didn't analyze Microsoft's risk or SolarWinds' risk. So if you want financial repercussions for what's gone on, feel free to go sue your vendor, but you're not getting it from insurance. And so that's a scary place to be. What I heard was whether you're on-prem, full public cloud, or hybrid, you need a SOC in your corner.
Yeah, I would say not just a SOC. You need somebody who's, especially when you're looking at the risk space and you're trying to manage that, you need somebody who's going to help
Yeah.
help you prioritize those things and understand those pieces. And,
Yeah, because when it comes down to it, you could tell someone, patch this, patch it now, but they're not in a position to patch it. I know a lot of my clients are currently watching from the beach. They would have to call Incenter to help patch that for them. So where this really becomes a joining partnership is the client approves it, we might do it, you're going to see it and tell us what to do, right?
Absolutely. And I think even before that, it may be that from a managed risk perspective, us with the client is saying, hey, this is bad. We are prioritizing this. Then they are working with Center in order to constantly keep that loop going, that iterative loop, to always be improving that posture.
Yeah, we have this common saying at Center, we say at almost every event we have, that there's only 4 things that really matter. The first is the first is not a proactive threat hunter. The rest of the team's gonna kill me for doing that. The first is a clean copy of data. The second is a proactive threat hunter. And the third, visibility to security gaps. The fourth, an incident response plan. What's cool about those first 3 is all of those are offensive or proactive approaches you can take to making sure that you never end up being breached. What's also cool is if you've been following us on this journey, if you joined us with the Pinkertons virtual event, maybe you did the beer science event, we did the crawfish boil, those were involving Cohesity, and that's that clean copy of data, the center of that story. This event and other recent events of ours with Arctic Wolf have been centered around security, and they do both the proactive threat hunter component and the visibility to security gaps. So the joining story between those 2 vendors, Cohesity, Arctic Wolf, and Center, is really where I think you need to be. There is another I'll throw in there. We actually have an upcoming event with them too that I'm going to talk about momentarily. That's with Microsoft. The Microsoft stack continues to mature, and I've noticed y'all's product actually evolves with that some. As they adapt, y'all adapt too. Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. I think again, going back to when we talked about, like, we don't want to be a point solution, we want to be a spectrum solution. As Microsoft or any vendor continues to evolve and have more offerings, from an Arctic Wolf perspective, the more data we can get to make decisions to help the concierge ultimately understand contextually what's going on in a customer's environment, to be able to assess those things and highlight them and work with the customer in order to prioritize them. We want that data.
Sure.
So as Microsoft continues and has new services in the way they do things, we are going to continue to develop our platform in order to utilize that data as part of our overall stack.
Yeah, most recently, Arctic Wolf has made an announcement of an acquisition of an IR company. Incident response has always, recently at least, been the responsibility of your insurance provider to bring in that IR firm in the event you make a claim. Well, the times are changing. Arctic Wolf has acquired Tetra Technologies, and they're hoping that you end up with an IR team in your corner as well. So in the event that a breach occurs, they already know what steps they're going to take, and you know what steps they're going to take. So you can tell your insurance company, here's the plan of what we're pushing forward with. That marriage, again, between those vendors and what Center can bring for you really puts together a full security posture, one that's definable and repeatable. Brett, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
The rest of you guys on that want to hear more about the cybersecurity message and how we can impact your environment with these types of tools, we're hoping that you'll book time with us to discuss it. So I know on the chat, Taylor, are you getting much, do we have any questions before Brett walks off stage? Anything worth chiming in on?
No. Andy just made a good comment about Arctic Wolf just wanting and shooting for being in the weeds with this process and getting really in depth and just being there for it.
Perfect. All right. Well, then, guys, if more questions come up, if you want to take a meeting with us and the Arctic Wolf team, let us know. Brett, in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Get some whiskey.
I will.
Judge your risk appetite. Maybe you don't drink the whole barrel.
That's it's probably a good.
Figure
a good
out where
early
on that
morning.
spectrum you are. Guys, while we're swapping out guests real quick, let me touch on something real fast. We have a couple of upcoming events. One great place that you can get to learn more about the Arctic Wolf story and Center Technologies' approach to cybersecurity. If you're in the Houston market, we're going to be on November 15th at Perry's Steakhouse. That's an in-person event. We'll have speakers from Arctic Wolf talking about real-life case scenarios, how the SMB and mid-market space has gotten out of hot water by having the right tool set in place. Love to have you there. If you want to do that, we may not know to reach out to you. Hit something in the chat right now and let us know. We'd be glad to have you. Welcome to have you there. The other event coming up, purely informational. We're doing a webinar. That webinar is going to be centered around the Microsoft stack. Microsoft's done quite a bit of changes lately. One of their major changes they've done is in their licensing. About a year ago this time, you probably heard messaging from us that NCE, the new commerce experience, was coming. Well, we were able to protect everybody, shield you from uprising costs, and did so for a year. But now Microsoft has caught on to our foolish games, and they are pushing it down on everybody by force. So we need to have discussions with all of our clients on 365 about what's coming and what to expect. Those of you who don't buy Microsoft from us, you can join too. Learn about what Microsoft's going through and get a quick understanding to know what you should talk to your vendor about. Separate from that, a lot of people put their data and their trust in SaaS applications like Microsoft. Those vendors, they tell you they're secure, they tell you you're backed up, but are they really? So our CTO is going to work through a little bit of some of the myths out there with Microsoft. Like, is my data really backed up with them? Am I really secure with Microsoft, etc.? So if you want to hear from our CTO, give this point of view. If you want to learn about what's coming with the changes of Microsoft, a product I'm sure you have in your environment, join us on December 7th. Taylor, is that right? 12/7?
Yep.
Perfect. December 7th, as we do a webinar centered around Microsoft and the changes there. Taylor, are we getting any good whiskey names for favorites?
So many.
Let's take a few minutes to name everyone.
Every single one of them. All right, I got to scroll up because the chat is blowing up.
Is it blowing up too much?
It's too much. I can hardly keep up, you guys. It's great. Garrison Brothers, always a good shout out.
Texas-based.
Blanton's, I feel like there's
not Texas-based.
Weller's, Buffalo
Okay.
Trace,
I'll
Uncle
say
Nearest.
Distillery. Yeah.
Uncle Nearest, have you heard of that?
Uncle Nearest.
I never heard
No.
of that one.
No.
Glendronach.
Yeah, different.
Scotch.
Totally different
Scotch,
side.
yeah. Yellow Rose.
Okay.
Ranger Creek. Lots of Ranger Creek people in here. Johnny Walker Black. So we got a bunch.
Scotch.
Four Roses.
Yeah, those are pretty good, right?
Woodford.
I mean, we're starting with whiskey drinkers, so I mean that means we can bring them into our fold.
Now you
eventually.
know who
Yeah,
you're talking
so,
to.
yeah, we're good.
Guys, this is TJ Miller. I'm important, I know, but TJ's much more important. So at one point in my life, I thought I want to be a middle management of a mid-sized IT company, and I rose to the ranks. I should have thought I want to be the owner and operator of a whiskey distillery, but I didn't do that. TJ, you're my idol, and I'm glad you're here today.
Yeah, when I was
Thanks
in
for being
corporate
here.
America, you know, I used to wear blue jeans, and they would say, "Hey, you should dress for the job you want." And I said, "Exactly." Right, so here I am.
But here, I'm ready.
So you're it,
Yeah,
right?
Are you hiring?
That's good. Maybe.
Okay.
So
Let me put on that hat real
yeah,
quick.
there
All
we go.
right.
Now we match.
So, you got all these different whiskeys, different bourbons, right? They taste great.
He's right from the bottle, guys.
Where do you want to start? When did y'all start this place?
So let's look at it. So, started planning this in 2007. So I'm one of the 3 original founders of Ranger Creek. I'm also the operations manager here. So I oversee all the production of beer and distilled spirits. So I can make beer. I used to do that a lot. I did all the distillation for the first 4 years of the company. Now they won't even let me in the back. They keep me in the office. I guess I'm on the computer a lot.
There's a chance they don't know y'all make beer here too. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so if we rewind the clock and we look at the history of beer, craft beer, and really craft spirits more recently, we had a lot of craft breweries that started back in the early 90s, and a lot of those got acquired by big companies, and they proceeded to run them right into the ground because they didn't really understand the culture, how to take a craft brewery and do that sort of stuff. And so really what we saw back in 2007 was craft distilling being where craft brewing was back in the early 90s. Now, at that time in San Antonio, we didn't even have a microbrewery in this town.
Really?
So seventh largest city in the U.S. had one brew pub in the entire city, which was Blue Star. It's still there,
Okay.
but it kind of begs the question, like, why don't we have
People
this?
that know the area know Pearl exists.
Yeah, I mean, but
That doesn't count.
well, it didn't exist back then in its current form. But what we've
its
seen
current
is
form, right?
in this industry, the things that support craft, the types of bars that pour craft, the cuisine that really caters to us, the food truck culture, all this stuff that really has grown up over the last 10 plus years have supported businesses like ours.
Sure.
So when we started, we went back and forth and said, brewery, distillery, which one do we want to be? And so I went to a conference in Kentucky with our regulators, which is the Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, and found out, was sitting in a really boring conversation. I don't know if you've ever been to a government conference, but they flashed this thing on a screen called alternate proprietorship. And I said, hold on, what's this? And they said, well, that basically means almost you can take this hat off, put another hat on, and be both a brewery, distillery, a winery, and do it in the same spot.
Wow.
And so I thought, that's great, but just because the federal government said it's good doesn't mean Texas is going to let us do it.
Yeah.
So ripped off an email to the TABC, said, hey, we want to do this. They said, you're good to go. You know, it was one of those things. I didn't need anything else.
That sounds boring. I've never been to a conference that boring, but I have been to government IT
Well,
conferences, and they're exciting. I'll
Yeah,
tell you
well, there were
much,
drinks
right?
that night because once we found out we could do this, we didn't have to pick between one of the two. So when we started, we were the first combined brewery / distillery in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you've seen Texas really evolve, and now if you go around the state in different cities, you're going to see more of that brewing distillery, breweries that have added distillation, distilleries that add brewing. And so it's just really good for the consumer because we really like to show that relationship between beer and whiskey.
Sure.
Because on the front end, it's about understanding how grains work together and fermentations, and then how the barrels work, obviously, as we continue to go on with our distillation. And it's really fun for us, and we get to use a lot of local ingredients. We'll talk about the bourbon, but it's all Texas grown corn. For example, if we're talking about beer, it's like most breweries will throw anything that's grown locally into the beer and see how it tastes, right?
Right. Well, you mentioned the corn. You buy from a producer that's in Belton?
Denton, Texas.
Denton.
Yep,
My bad,
MBS
Denton.
seed. So, for example, it's all what we call yellow dent food grade #1. That's the official name, but it's, you could buy deer corn if you want, but it's got sticks and rocks, and it's not necessarily something we want to put into our whiskey.
So it's a higher grade corn?
Yeah, but if you're like a moonshiner on TV,
Yeah.
works perfect, right? That's the only type of corn you can
We
get.
do a lot of deer hunting. We actually feed our deer that.
The good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we care about them.
Yeah. But, we've been able to help with all the growers too and
Yeah.
supporting and growing different stuff. And so, also the rye that we have is all Texas grown
Yeah.
rye. So, we go through quite a bit every week out here. He's really hitting this bottle, guys. It's, I think he really likes it a lot.
Well, I need a refill soon. You got a waiter? We'll find somebody,
so
I'm
you
sure.
there's some people out here.
Yeah,
Everybody's
they'll
drinking some
help
nice
me
old
out.
fashions,
Yeah, they'll
guys.
help
They're
me
having
out.
some good fun here tonight.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
what's a bet, right? I got to get through it now.
Yeah.
All right, so that's great. So Texas produced, Texas made. Y'all started off with beer. You were aging your whiskey, getting ready for a big release. I am curious. I know personal preferences will change, but I find that the 36, the stuff that we got made, right? This one here.
It's our flagship whiskey.
The flagship.
Yep.
This is, even though the other offerings you have are great, they taste wonderful, this is the smoothest. At what point do you stop testing and say, hey, I think we cracked the code, I think we got it?
You know, it's kind of weird because making beer is legal to do at home. You can homebrew. Some of you guys may homebrewing right now, but making whiskey at home is illegal. That's moonshining.
It's illegal.
It is, yeah.
But you can buy a still on Amazon and start it up.
You can, and you're on a list.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they might send you a nice letter and say,
So
hey, I
if
know
you
you got
bought a
this thing.
still off Amazon and started making your own, you'd be on a list?
Yeah, Jeff Bezos is sending it right over to them.
Huh.
Yeah, they're basically, it's like, you can own paraphernalia as long as you're not doing it, but they know that you have it. And
There's people in our audience right now who are stilling at home.
people
don't know that.
people are on Amazon right now probably buying.
I'm not sure they're listening.
I don't think you can get like a Mr. Still on Amazon where you
No.
just like press the button and it makes liquor for you. I'm sure one day that might be the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's illegal to do that.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's part of like the experimentation for us in the beginning. Now, I'm not going to say that I didn't make it at home, guys. Right. But if you're going to start a business making whiskey, you better make sure you know how to make whiskey.
Is that the delineation? If you're just making it as a hobbyist, but if you're making it as a business, it's illegal to do it at your home?
It's illegal. Period.
Period.
Yeah, it's illegal. Period.
Shucks.
And honestly, guys, it doesn't have anything to do with like safety or anything. It's all about tax money, right?
Tax money?
It's all about tax money.
The little prohibition days.
Yeah. But,
All right.
but what we had to do as the start of the company is, so when we started, it took us about 4 years to experiment with different sized barrels, everything from 5, 10s, 25s, 53 gallons, which is the ones you guys see behind us. This is a 25, 63 gallon wine cask. We changed the char levels on the inside. We changed fill levels, changed grain bills. We aged them inside, outside. We had hygrometers measuring humidity, really to see how Texas whiskey was aging. And I know we talked a little about Texas made, right?
Right.
I like Kentucky bourbon. I still drink it from time to time. But when we set out to do this, we set out to make Texas bourbon, not Kentucky bourbon. And so you can follow some of the same traditional techniques, but you have to make it unique to the temperature and the climate and the ingredients and the water and everything that makes it unique to Texas.
Well, other states have tried this. I don't think they've hit the radar like Texas hit. I'm going to put you in a group of guys like Balcones and Garrison and maybe TX Whiskey, blown to the top. Unbelievable how great Texas has become at doing this. What do you attribute that to? Is it the people, or is there something unique about the environment?
We all kind of, Balcones and Garrison and us all started around the same time. They kind of fight about who was first and who was second. But
they're second.
It's like I'm number 3, yeah. But I think what it is, there's something early on for us that said there's something about Texas and bourbon that go together, right? But more unique to us, if we got into, again, talking about water, for example, Central Texas has deep limestone beds. And so, one of the telltale signs of those are cave systems. So you can drive all up and down 35 and go climb it through caves if you want. But what that does is when the water passes through that, it removes all the iron.
Okay.
Puts a lot of good minerals into the whiskey. Central Texas is really, really good for making whiskey. One of the other parts of the country that have deep limestone beds, you know where that is?
No.
Kentucky.
No,
Yeah,
really?
big cave systems in Kentucky. And so our water here and our geology really has set us up well for that. The other thing is really on the maturation side. If you go to a Kentucky distillery, some of you guys have, you'll see 8-story rack houses and they paint the sides black. You know why they're doing that, right?
No.
They want more heat.
Oh.
Because when whiskey is cold in the barrel, it's sitting dormant. It's not
How
doing
do we
anything.
do on heat down here?
We got it, right? I mean, you can get it January, it's hot outside, and the whiskey's maturing, right? Because what's happening is, if we look at this barrel, as it gets hot, the liquid expands, goes through that char layer of the barrel, and then when it cools down at nighttime in other parts of the year, it contracts. So think about this accordion effect where the whiskey's going in and out, in and out, in and out. At the same time, if you guys have ever had real moonshine, maybe you had. You're drinking it from the bottle right now. It's
West Virginia.
That's it.
Quite the trip.
Yeah, it's got a little rough edge to it.
Morgantown, we burn couches.
That's what they do in Morgantown.
Right, yeah. Moonshine and couches.
Yeah, they've only won like 3 games this year, so I think there are probably more couches being burnt in Morgantown than any other year.
Wheat cakes. They do wheat cakes. The third thing they do. Yeah. That's it.
You got to do some tailgating then.
Yeah, that was all I did. Yeah, went and left.
Yeah. So think about that, that rough edge to the whiskey,
Sure.
and as it's passing through that char layer is like a filter. So if you guys say have a Brita filter at home, that typically uses coconut shell carbon, where the water passes through it and it's removing the impurities. This is wood carbon, so as it's going in and out, it's removing those rough edges. At the same time, there's all these natural sugars in the barrel.
Okay.
And so when you char them, there's things called vanillins, for example, and you char them, and then the alcohol over time breaks them down to taste and smell like guess what? Vanilla. That's why you typically get those sweeter notes, the caramel, the brown sugar, the vanilla,
Okay.
the honeys, all from this barrel.
So I would guess that TX whiskey brand, they really found a way to bring that to the front, whereas maybe Balcones found a way to bring almost a corn flavor or something different to the front.
Yeah, you have to think of the barrel as an ingredient as well.
Okay.
Right? And so when we work with our cooperages, there are no cooperages in Texas. We would use them if they were, but our barrels generally come from Kentucky. Most of that wood is cut out of the Ozarks, either Arkansas or Missouri. But where the wood grows matters, and so we may specify to the cooperage, when they're putting this barrel together, hey, let's toast it first, let it cool down, then they char it to a certain level. And
You
so,
brought a charred
I did.
arm, didn't you?
Yeah,
Can
so
we show that
if
because
I was-
there's businesses that just char for, that's all they do, right?
Yeah, it's just a cooperage. So typically, I could talk about a barrel for an hour. I know we would, completely monopolize the time here. But typically it sits outside for, up to 2 years, and it's called seasoning. So if you guys ever try to burn green wood, you notice it doesn't burn very well.
Yeah.
And that's because you want to leach all these tannins and things out of the wood. You get it to about 10 to 12% moisture content because you see this little bend in it.
Yeah.
So if it dries too much and you try to bend it to make this barrel, guess what's going to happen? It's going to crack, right?
crack, yeah.
And so you want to keep it to about 10 to 12%. There's no glue used to put this barrel together. And oak swells up when it gets liquid in it. But what you see once they have this thing together, it won't have ends on it, and they'll put it into a furnace and they'll kind of turn it on and they'll burn it. You can get everything from a toast, which is typically in the wine industry, to number 2, number 3, number 4. The higher the char, the more the char, all the way up to what we call alligator skin char. So it's burnt so much it looks like the skin of an alligator. But the balance of that, especially for Texas, is because of that heat we have, if this has got too high of a char level, and too small of a barrel, it's going to put too much extraction from it. You're going to get too kind of oaky, too kind of char level out of it. And so we have to put our char down just a little bit more when we do it.
When y'all tested and made your ingredients, did y'all test on multiple different levels of char, or did y'all kind of already have a sense of where you wanted to hone in at?
No, absolutely, yeah.
Alligator skin?
We tried. Alligator was probably too much for us. I'm not saying again that I didn't age some to see how it was going to work to begin with, but I had an idea of where to start.
Okay.
And so we started there, went down, worked with the cooperages to talk about, hey, let's bring the char level down, let's do some more toasting on it. And like I said, it took about 3 or 4 years and different wood. One of the things we found, we've got some barrels from a cooperage in Minnesota. And so if you looked at the growing season in Minnesota, it's colder, right? So the wood's more dense because if you looked at those rings, they would be a lot tighter, right? But it doesn't breathe as much, where you have a temperate climate like the Ozarks. And so if you cut that wood, the growing season is longer, so the trees grow a little bit bigger, and we tend to get a little bit more sweetness out of it. But if you want to do that, you can say, well, hey, that Minnesota wood's going to give us more spice, that Ozarks wood's going to give us a little bit more sweetness, and I can put in both barrels and then bat those together to create a little bit of unique consistency that comes out of these barrels.
Yeah, and you've seen a fad, kind of a trend, I guess, of people getting really small barrels, smaller than this. You got a few of them over in the bar side of your facility here. The aging goes faster because I guess it's just proportionate.
Yeah,
how's that work?
it's the liquid to surface area ratio. So think
old
about it that
liquid to
way.
surface
Yeah, and I'll be
ratio.
honest with you. Years ago,
That
I lived
ratio.
in Nashville, Tennessee before I moved here. I used to go to all the Kentucky bourbon distilleries, and one time I was in Buffalo Trace, and they had one of those 5-gallon barrels that we're talking about in there. They were aging a whole rack of them.
Wow.
And then about 2 years later, somebody wrote an article that said small barrels make lousy whiskey. It was coming out of Kentucky, and I
Really?
thought it's a little bit deceptive because again, we have to think about. For Kentucky, maybe that's the case. But as we get to other parts of the country and we talk about our heat, one of the things I think is really interesting is, guys like us or Balcones or Garrison Brothers have found these 25s to be unique size barrels for Texas because it's giving us about the optimal surface to liquid area ratio to the time frame to give it 2 years of aging. Now we are aging in the ones you see behind us, the 53s, but these 25s are unique in that it's giving us that time to age it, when we talk about a little bit faster. To get the whiskey out a little bit sooner.
Yeah, that's been a recent trend too. Say the last 2 years, maybe 3 years. There's been a lot written on you don't need to age a bourbon 9 years to advertise it is great.
Yeah.
I think I heard Old Forester just released something really old, like a 14 or 19 year age. At what point in your mind is it too much?
Yeah, people ask us like, you guys going to release a 10-year-old whiskey? How much whiskey would be left in this barrel after 10 years? There wouldn't be anything left in it because we
Evaporation?
get evaporation. We get something called the Angel Share. If you guys have seen or heard of this, and it's really the whiskey that escapes from the barrel during maturation. And so in that 5-gallon barrel, the Angel Share in 1 year is 33% gone.
Wow.
So think
It's
about
like cooking a brisket. It's all gone by the time
completely and so this barrel is going to lose about 6% a year. Go for 2 years, 3 years, you're going to get up to 18-20% sometimes. And some of that's absorbed into the wood, and the rest of it is the vapors that go up into the heavens, and the angels do good stuff for us, right?
So earlier in our last part of the presentation, we had the Nagy Angel. Wasn't that what Brett brought up, the Arctic Wolf, the Nagy Angel, and now we have the Angel Share. It's good we're keeping it religious here today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take another sip there. He's not going to finish this interview, guys, by the time we get to the end, I think.
I'm going to try to finish this interview. So,
I mean, that's only 96 proof whiskey that he's drinking right now, guys. So, I mean,
it's really
I'm
good.
not keeping track.
This
but
isn't the same bottle as this bottle. This bottle's a little bigger than this bottle.
Yeah, that's a 750
This is the
milliliter,
Tejas.
yeah.
You guys just released this. This is a bit unique. We're going to get into a bit of a tasting in a minute. Before we do that, do you want to talk a little about what some of these offerings are you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean,
There might be some locals that want to come by too.
Yeah, this one in
Plug it.
particular is the Tejas series. So we work with
This is half the Tejas series.
We with other makers in Texas, bourbon distilleries like Garrison and Balcones had formed the Texas Whiskey Association, and that's really us pushing our craft, right? Having a trade organization or a guild to really talk about what we do. We talked earlier a little bit about dirty secrets in the industry, right? Which is, if you guys go into a Specs or a Total Wine locally, 80% of that stuff on the shelf that says Texas isn't even made in Texas. It comes from an industrial plant out of Indiana. What we are is a grain to glass distillery. And so part of that is we've been doing this, this series where we do a barrel finish, where we take our bourbon, and this one in particular is finished in a mead barrel.
Okay.
And so we've done some of those where, barrel finishes where we've done Tempranillo wine barrels, where we've done Cabernet barrels. We did a Soltel barrel, which has
Wow.
almost tequila-esque character to it. We've actually got some barrels in the back where we've got some Lafroig, some Islay Scotch used barrels where we're aging some stuff in that. It's got that big phenolic peaty character to it.
Yeah.
And so those are just kind of the unique things guys like us can do with the barrels, and those are the types of special offerings outside the core that we'll talk about here in a second of whiskeys that we do.
So I'm going to get more into makers and fakers in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But before I do, it's the 36, which we just showed the bottle of.
Yep.
The Rimfire.
Yep.
And the Rye are the three common ones that I seem to see, commonly enough at least, in stores.
Mm-hmm.
Are there more than that? If I was going to my local liquor store that I might find from you guys that will be on shelves?
Yeah, so that's our core whiskeys, 36 being our flagship, the Rye being 100% rye aged in our used bourbon barrels, the Rimfire being our version of a Scotch. We can't call it Scotch for obvious reasons. We use a little bit of chocolate malt and some other types of stuff in there to give it a little bit, and smoke some of the grain within that. Other stuff you might find at the liquor store, we do some expressions of the 36, which is the cask strength, so that's right out of the barrel filtered. You're going to see that 120 to 130 proof. So we sell that one, and then we've done this 303 series, which we started for the 300th anniversary of San Antonio.
That's really cool.
And so the last one we did was a sherry cask finish on that one, which was straight up single malt finished in a sherry cask. So 2 years in primary cask like this, finished in a sherry cask. So think about your Macallan 18s of the world or others that are sherry cask finished, and it just adds a little bit of different element to the whiskey. And I think for consumers, it's always something cool and unique to try.
Yeah, not that this is a label you'll recognize at the liquor store. Don't get me wrong. When you're walking down the aisle, though, there are others that they're going to have a fairly similar label. If I were you guys and you're an enthusiast, go Google the look of that 300 series he's talking about. It's got it's not this one, but it's got this excellent picture of kind of a Day of the
sugar
Dead
skull,
yeah, the skull.
Yeah.
It's an incredible piece of artwork on the front of that, and I wish y'all would make that more available. For obvious reasons, you don't.
Yeah, we've made it. The first year we did it, we just did 300 bottles, right, for the 300th anniversary. He's still going, guys. The 300th anniversary of San Antonio, but we've started expanding that because it's gotten more and more popular as we keep going. So. You'll see more and more of that as the years go on.
Really, really good stuff. I can't.
Apparently,
get enough. Yeah. It goes down like Sprite.
Which one of you guys is driving him home tonight? That's what I'm asking. Or to the hotel or something.
So, to the hospital.
To the hospital.
Yeah. So, great job introducing the 300.
Yeah.
So let's talk about fakers to makers. That's what you called it. I had it backwards.
Yeah, it's been years ago. We did an article, a former business partner that's kind of moved on. He did an article that he called Makers versus Fakers.
Makers versus.
And
I feel it was broader than an article, though. You had its own website.
Yeah, it was like its
life.
own manifesto
Right,
in a way,
yeah,
right? Because it was, early on, it was at that time you feel like, hey, we're one of the few guys out here making this stuff, and, the vast majority of people are not. And it's a little deceptive to consumers. And, we probably took it a little too personal in the beginning, but it just highlighted something that then, you can go on and Google it now and find news articles from New York Times to CBS News to others talking about this dirty little secret in the industry. And it was our way of just kind of saying that. So, what we do now is we don't focus as much on them as we focus on us.
That makes sense.
And we tell our story. And, if I always tell people, if you want me to tell you what's in your liquor cabinet and what's not made by them, I'll educate you about what that is. and you may be surprised at the stuff that you think is one thing and it's actually not.
So without using names, then give it a little story. What's a synopsis or a scenario you would witness that, hey, this guy's claiming they have X when in reality it's something else? What is
Yeah,
that?
I mean, if you see something that says Texas whiskey on the label and then you look at it and it says something like produced by or bottled by, those are two words that tell you they don't make it.
They didn't
Just
make it
straight up,
themselves.
right? Produced by and bottled by, it just means basically you just bottled it. When you see words like distilled by,
Yeah.
mashed, fermented, those
Yeah.
types of words, those are your clue that those are the guys making it.
Okay.
And again, I think that's been part of we've had within our different trade organizations, guys splitting off groups because trying to tell our story.
Sure.
We're just trying to find like-minded people.
Would you say, though, that Texas trying to launch itself as having its own craft distilleries, was that a required element to the growth for it to ever really occur like it is now, or was it just a cheap way to make money quick?
I think most people that want to get into it, like for some of us that started, we're very intimately involved in making stuff, and,
Yeah.
and then somebody might come with just a lot of money and just want to start as hey, I want to play poker with my boys and I want them to all drink my stuff, right? And that's one way of doing it.
That might be me.
It might be you.
Maybe not.
But for some of us, our guys that work here, they take the passion and the art of this pretty
Right.
seriously.
Craft.
And what they do. You see a lot of guys that come from industries where they like to cook,
Sure.
or guys that are artists, people that are musicians, people that are already creative in that regard.
Yeah.
Like to get into types of things like this because we are trying to do something that's difficult. It's really hard to make good whiskey. It really is. It may seem easy to some level. And it's easy to get into, but making something consistent, especially when the guys in Kentucky don't generally make bad stuff, you've got a pretty high bar to cross and you got to get there pretty quick. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to leave that all for you.
Thank you.
He's,
All right.
He's thirsty tonight.
There's a handful of y'all that were quick. Y'all jumped on the registration fast. So the first 100 that did so all got a tasting kit. The tasting kit you received in the mail had this beautiful wooden box, but also contained 3 different versions of y'all's product that you were hoping to review with them today. Is that right?
Yeah. So those
Can
of
you
you
walk us through what
yeah,
that looks like?
those of you that have this, maybe you have some of our stuff in your liquor cabinet if you didn't get one of these. If not, you can run right down the street. I know most of you guys are in Texas. You can go to Total Wine Respects. They've all got it. You can buy it. But if you've got this box, I'm going to take this nice little top off here, and there's going to be three bottles in there. These are the core that we talked about. However, this one is more unique. So the 36, which is our flagship, which was the bottle that was being held up, this bottle that's going to be in this pack was specifically picked out just for you guys that came from this barrel that you're going to have inside that bottle.
So if they go get it from the store, it's going to be very similar,
Very similar,
but it's from this one.
Yeah, what we do on Barrel Picks is we get a chance, with you to come in, go through our rack house, go through about 5 different barrels. We'll steal some whiskey out of it. We'll try it and we'll go, hey, I really like the flavor profile of this one, because all barrels are a little bit different. They're not all
Sure.
the same. One might be a little sweeter at that time, maybe one a little spicier, maybe one a little bit woody. And so, this is the one that we chose and you guys chose for this one. And
Right.
so when you guys get to try that, you're going to see some of the different notes that come off of that.
Now, some of our customers were not as fast on the draw. They didn't get that. So for the sake of what we're about to kind of talk about and go through, if they have their own library to select from, do you recommend they go ahead and grab something now?
Yeah, if you guys have got a bourbon, I usually would recommend if you got any other Texas bourbon, you can pull your Garrison or your Balcones for that if you want to try it. If you got your Blantons, you want to pull it out, you can go and try that. I tried one
Yeah.
time, I said, we're the Blantons of Texas. I don't know if that was going to stick, but.
Well, you should
know,
try
if you put a
saying that
tag
more
on it.
frequently.
You should.
And Center Technology is the Blantons of IT.
See, if you keep saying it
that?
long enough, guys, somebody might actually believe it, right?
There you go. Cheers.
Yeah. So this one in particular, guys, when you try this, you can pour it in your glass. We typically go through a 4-step evaluation when we do this. You want to hold this for me
I'd
real
love to
quick?
hold that, yeah.
So if you've got a glass, I usually tell people this is called a Glencairn glass, which allows the kind of aromas to come up through it. You can use a low ball glass. I usually say if you're
Open that for you?
yeah, if you're grabbing a red Solo cup, we won't make fun of you. You can use that one as well. You want to drink it right from there?
No,
So,
I won't do that to
but
you.
we'll kind of pour that in. But as you see, the first thing we do is appearance in our evaluation. So we kind of hold it up to light, give it a look. Bourbon's aged in a brand new barrel every time, so it's going to have this deeper reddish hue to it. The other thing you can do, if you swirl it around, you're going to see those legs streak down the side of the glass, similar to wine. So you can actually determine a proof of a whiskey by the width of those legs. So the tinier the width, the higher the proof. The wider the width of those legs, the lower the proof. So it's about the viscosity, basically the surface tension between the alcohol and the water as it slides down the glass. So if you guys have ever seen like those moonshiners on TV that take that mason jar and they shake it, and they're like, oh, it looks like it's about this, and you think, well, that seems like total BS. But it's actually, there's some validity to that, right? That over time you can kind of train your eyeball to kind of see what that looks like. But that's appearance. We do aroma with our whiskeys. You know, some people, you know, I've seen them kind of corkscrew it up. Some people do like the drive-by under their nose. You know, our scientists like to waft it more towards their nose. What we recommend you do is so you get the aroma without getting the burn. Again, this is 96 proof, is to put it under your nose and then inhale through your mouth. So you can do this way, and that's going to allow those aromas really to come up into your nose. So what you guys may be getting at that point, some of the sweeter notes, I usually put bourbon in 3 buckets. The first being sweet, so think about those caramels, the brown sugars, the honeys, the vanillas, all those natural sugars from the oak. The second bucket is spice, so think about cinnamon, nutmeg, black pepper, that tends to come out in some. And that third bucket being the oak, so you might get the barrel. You know, you can go further into describing wood. Is it like fresh cut oak? Is it toasted oak? Is it charred oak? And so, you know, we can get a little too fancy sometimes with drinking whiskey, but I encourage you, you can go online and find these things called whiskey wheels, which will show you all these different flavors. And so a lot of people are like, I don't know what I'm smelling, and you just need a prompt. Sometimes I tell people these are like my inception moments, right? If I tell you it's like brown sugar, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, totally brown sugar.
For sure,
so I don't like to usually do that on the front end, but you'll see all these other flavors. Some might be, you know, fruity, and you get into the smoky ones and they're phenolic, and some might be earthy or something. And so those are just ways to kind of prompt yourself to see what you might be smelling.
You say you get maybe too fancy sometimes, but do people come through here that maybe are wine enthusiasts that are just learning about craft distilleries, and they tell you like, is that fig and banana? What is that I get? And you're like, where on earth did you come up with that?
Usually what I tell people, as long as you don't tell me you're smelling Brussels sprouts and asparagus, I think, you know, then I'm like, you might take a COVID test or something, right? Like your smell might be off. But generally, I try to say there's no wrong answer. Just kind of blurt it out. What are you getting? And eventually, you know, you might be able to get down to that. Honestly, some people just don't have good palates. They can't smell things very well, and that's fine. And you can train your nose to be a little bit better at it.
This has a ton of cotton candy.
So very sweet. Again, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, guys. I'm not sure. There is no cotton candy in that. It's all the sweetness that comes from the barrel that's contributing to that. Candy. Yeah. So that was appearance, aroma, and then we typically do what we call taste and finish in 2 sips. We take our first sip of the whiskey, and that's generally because if we are drinking beer, we've got hop oils all over our tongue. And if we think about how we were traditionally socialized to drink whiskey, which was how? Shoot it, right?
Well, sure.
Or what you're doing right now, which is, you know, drinking a lot from the bottle. And usually people are just chasing it at that point. And so when you start mixing those, you're not really getting the true flavor of the whiskey. And so we recommend people take the first sip, let it kind of coat your taste buds, and then give it a few seconds to kind of do that, let your mouth acclimate. And then take that second sip, and then you try to compare it. Does it change? Did it mature for you? You know, are you getting more sweetness in the second sip? Are you getting, you know, is it smoother? Are you getting more spice? I guarantee if you try it, you're going to find, especially with this whiskey or any whiskey, it's going to taste different between the first sip to the second, sometimes to the third sip.
Okay. And then for those at home now that are listening, smelling, getting all their senses that some probably felt, what do you recommend they do their small sips now?
Yeah, go ahead. If you haven't, go and take that first small sip of the whiskey. Let it coat your taste buds, and then think about, I'll kind of describe a little bit of this within there. Think about those 3 buckets again. Sometimes our nose is trying to get our mouth ready, right, for what we're about to taste. And so search for the sweetness. See how it might change from the front end of the palate all the way to the back. Look for where the spice might come through. And then think about the wood. And then especially on the finish, does it seem dry or does it seem long to you? In the finish. And I'm going to tell you this one in particular, if you've had that sip, it's going to continue to kind of go on in the back of your mouth. One of the things you see a lot of people do with whiskey is they add a little bit of water to it. And so water dilutes it. And for some people, they might add, you know, we typically will have like a small eyedropper and we'll add a couple drops to the whiskey. Some people might add a little bit more of water to it. But as that dilutes it down, it brings out different flavors. It's dropping the proof of it. Now, what we put this in the bottle is what we call as a distiller intended. That's where we want you to try it to start with, and then you can kind of start messing around with it. But as you dilute it down, sometimes it might make it better for you. Sometimes the flavors might be worse, at least the way that you like them to do that. But I always say, you know, try it neat first, and then you might add a couple drops of water. But what's going on inside your palate right now is your mouth is naturally diluting it down, right? As it sets in the saliva is diluting it. And so that's why it's changing a little bit of that flavor that's going in.
So what if you dilute it with Coke?
Here's what I tell people, you know, because it's like I learned this with craft beer. Craft beer has always had this really sometimes like snooty image.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anheuser-Busch did all these commercials where the guy at the bar and he's talking about he wants this, you know, special fruity beer or whatever. And so I think that's off-putting to people. And I've seen, you know, you go into a restaurant, sometimes that menu is so overwhelming that, you know, you don't want to embarrass yourself with that craft beer, so people revert back to what they know and they will give me a Coors or give me a Miller, right?
Sure.
And so we're not being inviting enough. I feel like craft whiskey can be that same way, where it's like, how do we bring more people in without making it seem snooty? And so here's what I tell people: try it neat first.
Yeah.
You know, add a couple drops of water, add an ice cube, let it slowly melt. They also make these things called whiskey stones. You guys may have seen, so you can put these in the fridge or the freezer, throw those in the glass. They'll cool it down without diluting it. You know, try it that way. If you're going to mix it in a cocktail that highlights the flavor of the whiskey. Plenty of you guys are drinking old fashions right now.
Yeah.
Manhattans work really well. But here's my key: as long as you buy our stuff, I don't care what you do with it, guys. If you want to mix it with Coke, I know that's like may not seem the right thing from a craft maker standpoint, but if that's how you enjoy drinking it, drink it how you like it. Let your friends make fun of you for it. If you like Smirnoff Ice and whatever else you like to drink, or Appletinis or whatever, drink them, be happy, and enjoy the company that you're with.
I like to just drink it like it's a glass of lemonade.
I can see that right
That's how
now.
I like to drink it.
Yeah.
I pour it on my cereal in the morning and work my way through the
Yeah,
day.
yeah. I guess I've just found that most people don't drink their whiskey neat.
No.
And so if I tell you there's only one way to drink whiskey, then you might not buy as much of it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different ways, especially with this mixology culture and
Right.
people want to do it. Like, you can find all these unique things to put in there
Yeah.
and create a really unique cocktail that highlights that whiskey and doesn't overpower it.
Excellent. So now that people are starting to shift over to the next one. Do you want to keep pouring, or do you want to just talk about
I think we'll
these?
just talk about it
That's
because
fine.
it'll
This
work.
is the rye or the rimfire? What do you
This
want
is the
next?
rye. We're going to do the rye next, guys, in this series. So this is our 44 rye. So when we started doing this, when we wanted to make a rye that was a little different. And so most ryes on the market, they have to be at least 51% rye. Most are about 70, and they use a little bit of corn, a little bit of barley. This is 100% rye. The other thing is most ryes are aged in brand new barrels, just like bourbon. And so you tend to get more of the sweet notes in most of those ryes, and they're much darker in appearance. So you'll see that difference when you pour it in a glass immediately. And so what this is what we call more of a spirit-forward whiskey. The bourbon is more barrel-forward, so you're going to get more of that barrel char and the sweetness that come out of it. This is really going to let the mint and spice and breadiness of the rye shine through.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit of vanilla that's coming from the used bourbon barrels as you search for it. Whereas the first one was 96 proof, this is 94 proof, still fairly high.
Yeah.
But as you guys get into nosing this, again, look for some of that kind of fruity elements, maybe a little bit of sweetness, and then on the taste and the finish as you get into it, you'll get that mint that might pop up, some of the rye character with the spice, maybe more kind of like peppercorn versus other types of nutmeg or cinnamon that comes out. But search for those types of things as you get into it.
It's been a fad that rye becomes the old-fashioned preference.
Yeah, people are really, so it's really the whiskey for Manhattans, for example.
Is it?
And I think because of the spicy nature of it, it tends to hold up. Man, you really are killing it. It tends to hold up really well inside of a cocktail, and that's why a lot of people like to have them inside old fashions.
I'll level with you.
Yeah.
I poured a giant tea in this bottle before
That's
we
why he's
started.
doing it.
I didn't
like,
actually
he's doing
chug a
all
whole
right.
bottle of whiskey, but the fun part, as y'all probably picked up on it, is that you were not aware of it. So
Yeah, I was not aware of
he
it.
thought he was going to pick me up off the floor here pretty soon.
We actually have TABC rules to keep people from doing that exact thing.
Freaking out about the liability.
Yeah, I'm like, I know he's got friends, but
Brett, remember the whole spectrum of risk we talked about? Yeah, he was analyzing his own at that moment.
yeah.
No, just tea. There's my other tea over there, just in
Okay,
case I needed
that's-
a second bottle for you.
That's good, guys. So I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
One tea's all we needed. Warm tea.
I will.
yeah.
I will tell you, rye has been one of those
Back in
polarizing
focus.
whiskeys. So you find people either they really like rye or they just
right, they
don't
don't.
like it.
Right.
And so if we, without getting to a history lesson, if we went way back in time, rye whiskey was really the American whiskey, and we look at where the distiller farmers in Pennsylvania were growing mostly rye, not corn. And so, after the Revolutionary War, the way they wanted to pay for it was by taxing distillers. And so they actually sent federal troops into Pennsylvania after these guys to pay taxes. And so there was a whiskey rebellion. They sent federal troops in, and so most of these guys packed their stuff up and they left. And they headed south and west, and they landed in Kentucky, where they weren't growing rye, but guess what? They were growing corn. And so that's why distillers will make alcohol of anything that'll ferment.
Right.
And so that's where we're at kind of the modern day, with bourbon and how the whole myth that's kind of started was a lot of those distillers that kind of moved their way down towards Kentucky to escape the revenuers,
Yeah.
from coming after their tax money. The ironic thing is George Washington owned the largest distillery in the U.S. at the time at Mount Vernon, making rye whiskey. They started making it again. If you guys ever get a chance, I think they charge like $200 a bottle, but they're making rye whiskey again at Mount Vernon.
Mount Vernon. Is it called Mount Vernon Rye
I
Whiskey?
forget what's something. It's got
to
George
look that
Washington's
one
face
up.
on it or something. But yeah, it's if you
The
get
dollar-
on, I
the
think
dollar bill?
I think you can only buy it on a tour or something. But
Gotcha.
it kind of shows that how whiskey's kind of changed over time. Bourbon really is. U.S. Congress declared it 1968 the native spirit of the U.S. It's the distinct product of the U.S. That's what allows us to make it in Texas. I can't tell you how many times we started this. People would come on a tour, and some people would get upset. I had a lady from Kentucky one time that threatened to rip all the labels off the bottles on the shelf because she said it can only be made in Kentucky. It can be made in any state. And so it is a product of the U.S. It's just like tequila is a product of Mexico, Scotch is a product of Scotland, bourbon is a
What was
product
her
of the
name?
US.
I might have met her. Was it Karen?
Karen?
Was it Karen?
Yeah, she was a Karen.
Was it Karen? It
Yeah,
was Karen. I
she
knew
was.
it.
Yeah.
Well, tell about this one, Rimfire.
Yeah. So let's move on to that. So this one for our Scotch drinkers out there, this is our kind of homage to that, and really wanted to make something that was more unique to Texas. And so what we did is instead of using peat, we use mesquite. And so we have a 20-foot shipping container. I know you guys do a lot of meat stuff,
Yeah, we do.
right? We have a 20-foot shipping container in the back that we convert into a smoker.
Okay.
And so we have a nice firebox on the back. We take 4 pounds of mesquite that we get from one of our local farmers. We make it cold smoke. So even if it flames up, we'll spray it down. We put about 800 pounds of barley malt on racks. And then as the shipping container fills up, we close the doors, and then that barley absorbs that smoke. And so then when we mash with it, when you guys try this one, you're going to get that smoke character that comes through. It's not going to be that super as people describe, like Band-Aid phenolic character that you get with Islay Scotches like Lafroig, Ardbeg, Lagavulin. This is going to be like nice and light. And then one of the other things being a brewery is this was a beer recipe that we started with. It was a porter beer. And so there's a little bit of chocolate malt in this as well. So as you guys get into it, you're going to taste little hints of chocolate along with that smoke. And so it's 86 proof, so just really, really cool whiskey.
I'm sure they're all your favorites in one form or another, but do you have one that you can kind of hang your hat on and say, of all these I'm most proud of or I'm most excited about?
Yeah, I
maybe
shouldn't
off of
say
this?
it because I have 23-year-old twin girls at home, but I always say it's like your children, right?
Yeah.
You got to love them both, but you do have a favorite.
You have a favorite, yeah, I know.
And so I'm a bourbon person, right? So this
one
is
you poured first.
Yeah, but it's the same thing though with all these whiskeys is you have to respect the uniqueness of it. And I see people sometimes that try something and they really like put it down. But if it's made to style, that's what it is. And so if you just don't like something, for example, if I don't want to drink Lafroig all night because I don't like that, that's fine, but Lafroig's made like it is, so just don't drink
Right.
it. So if you don't like rye whiskeys, we used to have somebody that
Plenty of others.
Yeah, I would always say they review stuff online, and I'm like, this guy never met a beer they ever liked, and because they would always buy all of our new stuff, and they would just always rake it over the coals, and I'm like,
Right.
well, at least he's buying it every time. So
Right.
I mean, I don't, whatever.
Well, there's a similarity there for sure. That if you've got a bad taste in your mouth, that the MSP, managed service provider community, from other managed service providers, don't let that soil your taste of Center Technologies. See, at Center Technologies, we believe in whiskey and meat, and if you believe in whiskey and meat, we're the right group for you. That was a good little plug.
That was,
Thank
man.
you for doing this.
Appreciate
This has
it.
been excellent.
Thank
Anything
you.
you want to add? Hey, Taylor, I didn't think about questions. Do we have anybody asking anything?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. When did you transition from 5-gallon to 10-gallon barrels for the 36 caliber bourbon?
Yeah, so the 36, if you guys have had that for a while, we started off, I was kind of talking about our experiment. So 5s were some of the first ones we did. We did 7 gallons, 10 gallons, and 15 gallons. That was the first about year and a half, and then we quickly started coming up into these 25s. The problem was these 25s had to go 2 years, and then we started making other changes to it, and so then we had to let it go another 2 years. So it took us a while to get off of those 5 and those smaller barrels. So it's been, I would say, a good solid 7 years since we've been doing 5 gallons. And at the time, a lot of craft distilleries were doing that and learning our way through it. What it gave us was kind of a more bold, compact whiskey. But economically, for these barrels, I can buy that barrel right there for the 53 for the same price I can get a 5 gallon, right? So just, it just spreads my economics out a little bit.
Yeah. Where do y'all source your water from?
So water comes right out of the Edwards Aquifer here. So if it comes in, again, we talked about those deep limestone beds that come through. We do have some water treatment that's mostly for the brewery if we're trying to meet certain beer styles. But for the whiskey, it's used straight as it comes right out of the aquifer here.
Good question.
Last one, do you mix, or maybe a few more, do you mix barrels, or is every bottle from a single barrel?
No, so what we do is, so when we talk about blending, That is a different thing. Typically, that means people are buying them from a bunch of different places and putting it together. What we call it is vatting. And so when we do a batch, we'll pick, because our rack houses, at the top it's hotter, so the stuff matures differently. Doesn't mean it's better or worse, but it may be darker, maybe have a little bit more character, like oaky or sweetness. So we'll put barrels from top, middle, bottom, and we'll taste them, but then we'll vat them together to create a consistent product. And so typically in any batch, you're going to see 10 to 15 different barrels put together. This one that you guys have, this one is all just one barrel. That's what we call single barrel, or if we're having cast, that's just.
Do you remember, was it top of rack or lower rack?
This one is about middle rack.
Middle rack?
Yeah, what we find is there's always this sweet spot inside a rack house that
Yeah.
you want barrels at.
This is the sweet spot?
You got this from a sweet spot,
Yeah,
yes.
this is the sweet spot.
And sometimes I'll describe this with like Jim Beam products. So if you guys ever have Jim Beam white label,
Yeah.
it's like 4 years old. You have Jim Beam black, which is like 7 or 8. And then I always say, what's 9-year-old Jim Beam? And everybody's like, I don't know. It's actually called Knob Creek. And so it doesn't say it on the label, but Knob Creek is just 9-year-old Jim Beam. And so you just find a certain sweet spot where
Yeah.
it's like that Goldilocks zone, right? It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right, and it's able to go that long till you get the right amount of flavor. So,
We'll end with this one. I mean, this is something I've always wondered. So, Todd, this is a great question. Start with beer and finish with whiskey, or start with whiskey and finish with beer?
All right, DJ.
I think the beer before liquor, never sicker phrase kind of comes into play here. Usually, what I say is I wouldn't really mix the two of them. But with our stuff, when we talk about distillation, it's really the types of alcohols that are left in by the distiller. And so there's all like on the front end of distillation, there's like the stuff we call heads. It has like methanol and other things. It's really the stuff that gives you a hangover.
Yeah.
So when you have good top shelf distilled stuff, that's a non-greedy distiller has removed most of that. So then you're mostly hungover because of lack of sleep or dehydration. Versus if you're drinking bottom shelf stuff, and you've got all those stuff, think about your body just trying to purge this, and 8 in the evening you're still going, what is going on? Well, you're just drinking toxic materials and your body's trying to purge it. So I always say, like, stick to top shelf stuff, drink a lot of water. I would not mix beer with the liquor like that because you can't separate them out. And all those fad things where you can buy in the store about taking pills to help you with hangovers, that's all jokes. So
I always thought the lesson was 1 bourbon, 1 scotch, 1 beer.
yeah, as long as you stay with 3, like
That's
if that
it,
3
though.
for the night, you might be all
Moderation,
right.
right? Moderation's
That's
key there.
That's why probably like for a lot of you guys, like wine hangovers are completely different for people, right? Because there's a lot of different things in there that from beer to wine to spirit. So just drink more top shelf stuff. Drink water, guys. Get some rest. I think you'll be all right.
Nice. Yeah, we're big on moderation. You don't have to drink a barrel of whiskey just because there's a barrel sitting there. You can drink a bottle of whiskey as long as it's tea
As long as
and
it's
not
tea,
actually
guys.
whiskey.
I was impressed for a minute.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have been. All right, well, guys, thank you all so much for joining us again. We enjoy getting to do these things. Center does these with the intent of bringing certain tech awareness to you. We know that y'all are busy and it's tough to lift your head up out of the weeds to see what's out there as far as what's new to the tech stack. Simultaneously, you don't get it to get out enough to come see these things like Ranger Creek here in San Antonio. So in the event you want to continue the conversation, if you're in Houston, join us at Perry's on the 15th. If you're not, let's set a meeting up with your account executive at Center. I'm happy to join too. For those of y'all on the call, we might even get a call from Taylor or from me tomorrow to help schedule time for us to continue the conversation. I'll be here for another, 6 hours, drinking more tea.
More tea.
And if you want to come down right now and join us here in San Antonio, we look forward to seeing you. That's a great point. Taylor, do you want to speak up?
Stay tuned, guys. Give us some grace for the next couple of weeks. Our account executives are going to go hand deliver these bottles to you guys, everybody that's been on. So,
Yeah, so we're bringing all these back.
Yeah.
They're all coming back with us. This is bottle 77, for example. And we're going to take these out into the field and bring them to you guys. Along the way, if y'all have any requirements, like, hey, we're not in the office yet, we're somewhere else, or whatever that is, let your account exec, Taylor, Sarah,
Email us,
myself
yeah.
know, and we'll make sure you get yours. Thanks again for joining us, guys.
Awesome.
Pretty good. All right, who was scared?
What was that? Come on. Who was nervous?